A dozen Soviet military advisors are working with Nicaraguan troops. ABC's John McWethy says they're not reported to be involved in combat, but are providing technical and tactical help in some of the areas where the fighting is heavy. McWethy has just been to one of those areas, and he reports tonight on the Sandinistas' controversial resettlement program.
It is daybreak in a combat zone, northern Nicaragua on the border with Honduras. This is where what is being debated in Washington will have its greatest impact. These are the people, the peasants or campesinos, who are caught in the middle. Because of the war being waged by the pro-American guerrillas called Contras, the government of Nicaragua has ordered tens of thousands of these peasants to leave their villages. They are loaded onto trucks and are hauled off to resettlement camps. Nicaragua says the peasants and their children are brought here to protect them from the Contras. Others say it is to prevent these farmers from helping the guerrillas and to provide free labor to work the valuable coffee plantations of this border region. In either case, resettlement camps like this one at El Escambray, which is just 1 mile from the Honduran border and the land of the Contras, accomplishes both ends. It is constantly under the watchful eye of a Nicaraguan army garrison and its Cuban advisors. They are in and out of camp all day. 56 families have been moved into this makeshift housing in the last 2 months. Though ABC had a Nicaraguan army escort, many in this refugee camp said quite openly that they were forced to move here against their will, that they supported neither side in the war, but just wanted to be left alone. Guillermo Agurcia, who has already lost one son in the fighting, was uprooted with his family from his isolated mountain farm. He was not allowed to bring his 2 mules, his cow, or pigs, and presumes the government took them. He hates it here, but would not say that on camera. Others who would talk on camera said they are content. For many, this resettlement camp is providing better housing than they've ever had before. A clinic with a nurse, schools for their children, and food on the table. There is little understanding of world politics here, plenty of criticism for both the Marxist government of Nicaragua and the Contras who want to overthrow it. But there is a special kind of feeling about the Yankee, respect and fear, a feeling that help from the U.S. would be welcome, but not the kind of help that brings more fighting, more killing into the lives of people who are already struggling just to survive. John McWethy, ABC News, El Escambray, Nicaragua.
George Will joins us tonight with commentary from Washington.
It is called the White Dove of the Desert, a vision of the past set amidst the scrub brush and cactus. San Javier del Bac, for 300 years a Franciscan mission for the Papago Indians. So next time you're in Tucson, stop by San Javier, soak in the history.
Kate, we're outside the Alameda Naval Air Station to look at a controversy over nuclear materials, how they're transported through the Bay Area by the military and by others. Same freeways that you and I drive on every day. It's also an especially emotional issue in cities like Oakland that have declared themselves nuclear-free zones, a status the federal government and the military don't recognize.
It was their worst nightmare that this truck, or one of dozens like it, would be traveling through Oakland on Interstate 880 when the big quake hit.
There are nuclear bombs and nuclear materials traveling through this city.
If there had been any of those materials on that structure when it collapsed, there could have been really serious contamination.
They are supposed to withstand a 3-foot, only 36-inch drop onto a steel pin, an amount of pressure and force, frankly, that is nothing like having a freeway dropped on something, to say the least.
That kind of concern prompted Oakland residents to make their city a nuclear-free zone last year, joining nearby Berkeley and 166 other U.S. cities that have adopted similar resolutions. But the federal government has filed suit to have Oakland's ordinance overturned.
If each municipality in the United States, such as Oakland, were to develop, but with a slightly different slant, its own policy with respect to the transmission of material through its borders, it would be virtually impossible for the federal government in any of its departments to carry out in an effective way, in an orderly way, its business.
Oakland's Nuclear Free Zone Act does not allow the storage of nuclear waste within city limits or the presence of nuclear reactors. Nuclear weapons-related work is prohibited in Oakland, and so is buying from or investing in companies that do nuclear-related work. Oakland's Nuclear Free Zone Act requires shippers of radioactive materials to notify the city 45 days in advance, and it requires public hearings to decide what routes will be used to transport hazardous cargo through the city.
There are some things, the consequences of which are so terrible that for the best of reasons, or even if there are the best of reasons, any government cannot be allowed to go forward with it. We have that type of thing in the nuclear arms race.
The federal government says the design and manufacture of nuclear weapons, as well as their transport and testing, is none of Oakland's business. They say only federal agencies can regulate radioactive materials. The government's lawsuit, filed in September, claims Oakland's Nuclear Free Zone Act violates the War Powers Act, the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act, the federal secrecy laws, and that it illegally restricts interstate commerce.
There's a serious question as to whether or not citizens of Oakland are safe with all the kinds of nuclear materials that come through our community. And we, as a local government, with the support of our citizens, have a right to step in and to have some say-so over the routes and the timing of some of these materials coming through our community.
Oakland city government officials notified more than 100 carriers of hazardous materials, including federal agencies like the Department of Energy, of its new reporting requirements. According to notifications on file, all but one are ignoring them.
Well, the provisions of the law that they notify me, they're there. I mean, they're supposed to ask me and tell me. I'm not supposed to ask them whether or not, what type of business that they're doing. I think the onus is on them.
But federal agencies and shippers of radioactive materials aren't talking. Trucks have been hauling nuclear material on interstate highways for years. This truck was filmed carrying radioactive waste through Oakland on I-880 3 years ago. And in a recently completed documentary, these DOE trucks were filmed carrying what the producers say were nuclear bombs on an interstate highway somewhere between Texas and Tennessee. But the DOE wouldn't tell you that then, and it won't tell you that now. Neither will any branch of the armed forces. Information about where these trucks come from, when they travel, and what routes they actually take is classified. Federal secrecy laws conflict with Oakland's Nuclear Free Zone Act, which requires public disclosure of that kind of information. This will be a major point of contention in the upcoming trial next month.
Ironically, by taking the city of Oakland to court, the federal government has been forced to release information it's never made public before. These court documents show that the city is literally the center of nuclear weapons distribution in the Bay Area. Nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons parts, and radioactive material travel through the city of Oakland on a regular basis, on the highways, on city streets, and through the ports.
The city is surrounded by military bases, 7 of which are now known to handle nuclear weapons or radioactive materials. And one of the country's 2 nuclear weapons design laboratories is in nearby Livermore. 5 nuclear-powered ships are berthed in Alameda. The Oakland Naval Supply Center provides nuclear weapons parts and supports to these ships, as well as the entire Pacific Fleet. The regional chief of the Department of Energy claims that all the radioactive material trucked through Oakland is shipped according to federal regulations set by the Department of Transportation. One of the department's approved routes for moving radioactive material to and from Alameda Air Station and the Oakland Naval Supply Center was I-880, the same highway that collapsed in last month's earthquake.
The problem is one of self-enforcement. They put out these regulations and they trust the trucking companies or whatever who are actually hauling these materials to comply with those regulations properly. And frankly, the record of the nuclear industry in this country, both military and civilian, is such that that trust is, to say the least, misplaced.
As far as we know, there were no radioactive materials on I-880 when the superstructure went down, but there was highly toxic nuclear waste sitting in nearby Livermore when the big quake hit. Nuclear-free zone organizers are trying to make all of Alameda County a nuclear-free zone. If they succeed, the lab may be forced to move its waste elsewhere.
And I'm talking about the fact that they're also storing their radioactive waste outdoors on these same asphalt yards that they're storing their toxic waste, and there are no barriers to keep incompatibles from mixing when they spill.
Nuclear-free zone advocates say federal standards are set too low and that enforcement is weak when it comes to public safety. If the federal government wins its suit to overturn the Nuclear-Free Zone Act, Oakland residents who've decided to live in a nuclear-free future will be forced to live in a nuclear-filled one, whether they like it or not.
We contacted the Department of Energy and the Navy. Both declined to be interviewed or to participate in our report. Based on past statements, their position seems to be that secrecy surrounding the movement of nuclear materials is a question of national security. Kate, back to you.